David McReynolds of the War Resisters League, giving a talk in 1960. And there's the Kramer shop right behind it, and the 8th Street bookstore, an iconic bookstore. Presenting himself as a surrealist in his art as well as his life, Kramer drew inspiration from Salvador Dali. And Dali used a lot of lobster imagery in his artwork, and that's a fabulous George Plattline's photo that's in the Met. And there's Kramer with a 15-pound lobster, and he made that carrying case to carry the lobster. Kramer invented all sorts of clever marketing ploys to advertise the shop, including costumed space girls wearing his jewelry who would roam the Greenwich Village streets handing out flyers. And there's one of his space girls with him in front of the shop wearing a necklace. And they wore a green makeup, and they would either go on a moped or walk around the village in the evenings handing out flyers advertising the store. That's around 1955. The shop's entrance was located on the 2nd floor, which was accessed by an outdoor staircase. So this is a picture of the shop from 1946. And there's jewelry by Sam Kramer, and also there's that mushroom. And the mushroom. And there, you have another view of the mushroom, and you have another view of the shop. It was also next to, I don't think you can see it in this image, but there was a Chinese restaurant right next to it with chop suey. It's such iconic America and New York and Greenwich Village where he was. So this picture of the shop is from around 1955, and you can see his showcase. He had a showcase, which was there. Yeah. So there was jewelry in the showcase, and there's the mushroom, and all sorts of strange things hanging off of. There's another mushroom, and you'd go up the stairs, and he was there to the left, up there. And there's Sam Kramer, fantastic jewelry, etc., etc. I know a few people who knew him. Paul Smith, a director emeritus of the American Craft Museum, now called MAD. Before that, now it's the Museum of Arts and Design, or MAD, Museum of Contemporary Crafts, then the American Crafts Museum. So Paul knew Sam. He had some remembrances. If any of you know the jeweler Debbie Aguado, know her work. She's a New York jeweler. She told me a story. She had just gotten married, newly married, 20 years old, 21 years old. She goes up she knows of Sam Kramer. She goes up the stairs, and Sam is sitting, is behind the showcase. And she put her hand down, and he said to her, "You married?" She said, "Yeah, I just got married." He said, "You're not legally married." Now, she never met this man before. She just had heard of him. She said, "What do you mean I'm not legally married?" He said, "You can't be legally married in an Ed Wiener ring." Spontaneous. And this is Picasso's Three Musicians from 1921. And even though Kramer was not, or denied being directly influenced by Cubism, we certainly see it in some of the works. Particularly the the frontal planes and displaced body parts in this collaborative brooch of Sam and Carol called The Lovers. I expect a question from Andy on this one at the end of the talk. Look carefully. And The pelvis does swivel. I guess it does. It's as it should. The pelvis swivels. But back to Cubism. Forget the pelvis and look at the eye. Girl Before a Mirror by Picasso. And in this Ring by Kramer, also a palpable influence from Cubism. The eye is placed frontally in both the lovers and in this ring, although the face is in profile. And we see the mouth also frontal on this piece. The shifting perspective of mass and void seen in Cubist sculpture, for example, in this gilded bronze sculpture from 1923 by Rudolf Belling, informed other pieces in Kramer's repertoire. So this is a paperweight that is in the form of a very, very, very abstract pterodactyl, and Kramer's own personal ring that he wore all the time. Kramer avidly collected gems and minerals, some quite rare, which he sold through the shop and mail order to craftspeople and hobbyists. Along with the glass taxidermy eyes he consistently used himself. He tells of visiting a house on Staten Island, whether precious gems, and this is also a collaboration with Peggy Ackerley, earrings, or carved bone. Organic materials usually played a prominent role in his jewelry. Kramer is known to have expressed disappointment when Carol's gallstones, removed during gallbladder surgery, were too soft to set in a bracelet he wanted to make for her. And Morgan Ackerley, Peggy Ackerley's daughter, says she remembers seeing them in a jar. He put them in a jar, and he kept them there in the studio. Kramer and Carol divorced in 1957, and he married Doris Ann Sherrill, whom he dubbed simply Cheryl, in 1958. He taught her to make jewelry and modeled the new version of his shop after the one he had shared with Carol. And the truth is that he had a show with, he had written an article about working with Carol. I think it was Handmade Jewelry by Sam and Carol Kramer, which was published in, many of the things he wrote were published in several journals and catalogs of small exhibitions that he had. And when he married Cheryl, he had an exhibition in 1958 in Statesville, North Carolina, where Cheryl came from. And it was called Hand-Wrought Jewelry by Sam Kramer and Cheryl. And I looked at these two documents word for word, and they were identical. The only thing he changed was his wife's name. This is true. However, the marriage lasted only 3 years. And shortly thereafter, Carol returned to the shop. When Kramer died of a heart ailment in 1964, at only 50 years of age, Carol ran the business alone until their son John, also a metalsmith, joined her in 1970. The Sam Kramer studio, which moved to West 4th Street, closed its doors permanently in 1974. Sam Kramer was truly one of a kind in both his persona and his practice. He took chances at a time when the post-war economy was booming, and most jewelers sought job security within the dependable fine jewelry market or the increased factory production available due to simplified, machine-friendly designs that we see in the costume jewelry of the period. But Kramer fancied himself an artist with the aim of making jewelry as expressive as painting and sculpture. And although this is something that we take for granted today, for 1940, 1939, really, when he opened his first shop, this was revolutionary thinking. The only other artist or artist jeweler who was making jewelry at that time based upon modern painting and sculpture motifs was really Calder. And Calder was making jewelry from the early 1930s that were really an extension of his own sculptural practice. But he never said, that I am making jewelry as expressive as my mobiles. It was implicit in his practice. Kramer verbalized it, and he was really the first one that said, I want to make jewelry as expressive as painting and sculpture. And he was very successful in selling these outrageous works that were actually quite expensive for the time. And one of the documents that I found, and I don't know if he made this kind of money every year, but one of the documents I found showed an income of 250 grand, which is amazing. For the mid 20th century, on 8th Street in Greenwich Village, may have been only 1 year. The things were very expensive. The large pendants I showed you were $14, $15, $25. That was a lot of money back then. People are always asking me, what are these things worth now? Those large pendants that I showed at the beginning, the molten metal pendants, only a couple of them are available, and it's 25 grand. So these things are rare, and they are very, very, very coveted. His influence on his contemporaries was palpable, and he inspired many jewelry makers who came after. Sam Kramer's impact is only now being evaluated and fully appreciated. And hopefully my forthcoming book will redress this and put more focus on the modernist jeweler that I think is really one of the most interesting of all of them. I mean, his craftsmanship that, I'm sure contemporary teachers would have been aghast at. But that's not what he was all about. He was capable of doing it better. It's not really what he was about. He was attacking the metal, and he was trying to forge an expressiveness. I really believe he was a trailblazing artist. People have asked me how this book came about. For those of you who know Messengers of Modernism, or who know the word modernist jeweler, which is the term that we coined to describe the jewelers who worked in their studios in the mid-20th century, mostly in Greenwich Village and Northern California, although there were several in San Diego, Los Angeles, and scattered around the country. Two have really emerged as the most well-known. Art Smith, who many people have heard of, and Margaret Tapata, who many people have also heard of. Sam Kramer was sort of the last one in that triumvirate of the really, really, really unique and important modernist jewelers, but he has remained very, very obscure. And it's odd that the other two have gotten so much attention. I mean, Margaret Zapata had a show at MAD a few years ago. Margaret Zapata and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was a teacher of hers at the New Bauhaus in Chicago. Art Smith has gotten a tremendous amount of attention and press and books. And I was trying to think of the reason why Sam Kramer fell between the cracks. And I think it's because the pieces, like the ones I showed you, the really major works, just are not available. He was extremely prolific, and he was, as I said, quite successful. But it was more of the production work than the really incredible one-of-a-kind pieces. So I just don't think people got to see that work and appreciate that work, and he was pretty much under the radar. But I am hoping to redress that in Munich in March during Munich Jewelry Week. Going to have a book event at Gallery Handwerk for any of you who have ever been to Schmuck and have gone to the Munich Jewelry Week events. And another one in New York in May. And then as I was telling some friends here, I'm going to do a walking tour of Greenwich Village to the shops, Sam Kramer's shop, Paul Obel's shop, Frank Rabahe's shop, Ed Wiener's shop. There are 16 shops that were in Greenwich Village between 3rd Street and 4th Street, and McDougal and Christopher, which are now TD Banks and CVS's. But I think it'll be fun to see where these people were and the way they really, really began what we now are the beneficiaries of. So does anybody have any questions about Kramer, about other modernist jewelers? What's for lunch? I mean, whatever.
What sparked your desire to write the book? I mean, so he was one of three, but...
Well, one of the three most important. Right. There were many, many, many.
How did you decide to pick him?
Okay. I actually didn't. Mark McDonald, who is the preeminent dealer in mid-20th century decorative arts, not just jewelry, but ceramics and glass. He had a shop with two partners called 50/50 Gallery, which was on Broadway and 12th Street. And then he had a gallery on his own, Gansevoort Gallery, and now he deals privately. But he's really the most important dealer in this material. And there was a fair in New York called Collective, which was for a few years. It was a beautiful fair, but it was not successful, so it's now defunct. And it covered the whole kind of 20th into the 21st centuries. A lot of major dealers took booths there. So Mark was doing Collective, and he had a few Sam Kramer pieces, and he said, "Toni, you gotta write a book on Sam Kramer." And I said, And I coincidentally was having lunch with Dirk Allgeier, who is the of Arnal. He owns Arnalcia Art Publishers in Stuttgart. Mark said that, and then the next day I had lunch with Dirk, and over my salad d'Isoise, I blurted out, "Hey, you want a book on Sam Kramer?" And he said, "Sure." So that was how it happened. And that was 4 years ago. And the frustration with this book was the lack of access to anybody who knew him. Everybody was gone. And Chico at the time was 28 years old. He never knew his grandfather. I mean, he and his younger sister Carol, who was named for her grandmother, is in her 20s. I mean, they never knew their grandparents, but they're very committed to him getting the credit that he's due, and getting these archives. I mean, when I went up to Williamstown, we went to the basement of the Split Ranch, and it was, there was so much mold and mildew opening these cardboard boxes, but it was just such a treasure trove of material on this one artist. But that's how it came about. It really was, sort of a coincidence that just made it seem so right. And I was just lucky to be able to get all of this archival material. Are there any other questions?
Toni, where's that material going to go after you've done your work with it?
Well, I have suggested that they donate it to the Archives of American Art. Whether the family will do that or not, I don't know, but that's what I suggested. That's where I think it should go, because I know I've done so much research at the Archives of American Art, and it's invaluable to scholars, just invaluable. So I hope that's what will happen. Meanwhile, it's in my dining room. We have christened my dining room Kramer Central, and every like Thanksgiving. I mean, there have been 3 Thanksgivings where we've had to clean out the dining room. It's just, I mean, you have no idea how much material I have. So, yeah, there was another question. Yes?
You drew a lot of parallels between Kramer's work and various sorts of fine arts practice.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you encountered any influence on him of the earlier 20th century arts and crafts influenced American work, especially Janet Payne Bowles.
That's a really good question. And I have thought about this for years. I cannot find any direct influence from the modernist jewelers and the arts and crafts practice of the early 20th century, which I have always found, I'm just going to move a little because that light is in my eyes, I've always found ironic. The spirit was the same, but the impetus was different. And these modernist jewelers really referred to the great let's call it the great movements in modern art. The only modernist jeweler that was still living that I was lucky enough to interview was Ed Wiener. And he may be the most well-known of all of them. He was extremely prolific, and a lot of people have Ed Wiener's work. And Ed loved jazz. I love jazz. Ed loved to drink. I love to drink. And we used to sit in his studio. He was on 20th Street between 5th and Broadway, drink wine, listen to John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and just let him talk and talk and talk. He was very, very bright and this is Ed Wiener, very bright, very articulate. And, he talked about, I would go to MoMA, I would look at Demoiselle d'Avignon, and I would say, how can I interpret this in jewelry? And according to what with Kramer, it's so obvious just looking at the pieces. And I asked Ed about the arts and crafts movement, and although they were cognizant of it, or at least he, the arts and crafts movement didn't really come on the radar until the 1980s. There was a big show that explored the arts and crafts movement in America. And although everybody knew about a few kind of, that they knew about the people, they didn't really, there wasn't much literature on it. They didn't see it. So I think that would, someone like Janet Payne Bowles, it would be, don't remember if it was, I don't remember, but there's a big catalog on it. And then there was a book about much focus on it. Am I getting the skeleton?
You have a book.
That's true.